Okay, hello and welcome everyone. On behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers and the Ocean and Climate Group, I'd like to welcome you to our session, Finding Green Solutions in Blue Forests. So in the next 30 minutes, you're going to learn about what blue forests are and how they could actually help the Nordic region in reaching ambitious climate goals. So my name is Ingrid. I'm a marine biologist and I'm the Norwegian representative in this Ocean and Climate Group. But first, I'm actually really interested in knowing how much you guys know about blue forest. And if you do, we're going to do a little Mentimeter. So if you put that on back there. I don't know if you guys have used this before. If you go to menti.com. We're going to get this up on the screen, but you can just get your phones ready or your computer. And what I'm wondering, if you write in this code, is it too small? 6888670. So 6888670. And I'm wondering if you can give me like the first 1, 2, 3 words that come into your mind when you hear the words blue forest. So this is anonymous, so it doesn't matter if your answer is wrong. And these words should start popping up on the screen when you're ready. You do not have to do 3. You can also do just 1. Oh, coming up, carbon, and you see algae. You're on the right track. Seaweed, kelp. I'm impressed. Carbon sink. When I looked these words up on Google, all I got were blue trees, like forest trees that were blue. So you're already doing really well. Kelp looks like a lot of people have in mind here. Carbon sink. All right, that's good, great. I see that you guys are actually pretty familiar with these words, but in case that somebody's sitting out here not really sure what blue forests are, I'm going to give you a little introduction. So, blue forests are many different types of ecosystems. So we have kelp here, rockweed beds, we have seagrass meadows. These are all very found along the coast in the Nordic region. And we have mangroves, not very normal in the Nordic regions, but they're also blue forests. And then we have something called tidal marshes. So these ecosystems are very productive, they're very biodiverse, and they're also home to a lot of different marine species. They also protect both islands and coastlines against waves and other effects of climate change. And last but not least, they are natural carbon storage ecosystems. So they take up carbon and then they store it. So I guess a lot of you would, maybe you just know kelp and seaweed and rockweed from when you're out swimming and it's like sticky and smelly and it's a bit gross and that's where all the crabs live. But next time you go swimming, remember that these are actually very, very useful. So now we're going to hear more about blue forests from Marianne, who's the leader of the NMR Ocean and Climate Group, and Solrun.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ingrid, for setting the scene for us. I'm here with Solrun Kjellum. You are a research director for sustainable societal development at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research. And you are also the chair of the board for the Norwegian Blue Forest Network. So I'm very pleased to welcome you to the Nordic Pavilion here at COP26 in Glasgow.
Thank you so much, Marianne. That was quite loud. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to start by thanking the Council of Nordic Ministers for organizing this Ocean Day, because where I work, we have a lot of people who are passionate about ocean and climate, and there's still a lot to learn. So it's important that we do this, and I'm very happy to be here to talk about blue forests.
Yeah, well, Solrun, why should the Nordic care about their blue forests?
I think they should care for many reasons. It's been mentioned a little bit in the introduction already. These blue forests, they provide a plethora of ecosystem services, and they have commercial value for the Nordic countries as well. And we have a lot of blue forests in the Nordic countries. In fact, we have all the different types of blue forests except for mangroves. And even though we are small countries, our oceans and our waters contain 1% of the global kelp forests. And these are magnificent ecosystems. I mean, they deliver on at least 8 of the different SDGs from the UN, and it was mentioned before. They store vast amounts of carbon. They protect the shorelines from erosions. They improve water quality. They're home to numerous marine species. And in the Nordics, they're nursery ground for a lot of commercially important species. And in the Nordics, we also see sort of a budding industry of cultivating blue forests commercially, in particular kelp. And we're seeing products come out like chocolate, pasta, beer, hairline products based on seaweed. So it really is innovation coming on. And you can use them for bioplastics, and you can use them for medicinal products. And there's also a climate effect of cultivating these species commercially. And in NIVA, we're currently looking into research on how much carbon you actually sequester when you grow kelp on ropes in the ocean. We don't know exactly how much, so this is something we're learning about now. But also some of the products that you can produce from kelp can substitute other products that have emissions, such as fossil products, for example. And a few days ago here at COP, there was a methane pledge that the world will reduce methane by 30% by 2030. And one of the ways kelp can contribute is that you can put kelp into the feed for cows, and that will make them burp less methane. So they can deliver on this pledge and many, many other things. But it's important to say that the Nordics are rich countries, they're affluent countries, and in other countries around the world, the ecosystem services really are more important. These forests are important for food security, and they are important to combat poverty.
Yeah, interesting. So this means that there are other coastal areas in the world beside the Nordic region that has a rich blue forest.
For sure. Luckily, the blue forests are still abundant in many places. Roughly 3/4 of the countries have some sort of blue forests. And kelp can be found on all continents, but mangroves, for example, they tend to be happy in the tropics and the subtropics.
Thank you, Solrun. So I will just include the audience in some of the work that has been done at the Nordic Council of Ministers. In recent years, we have been increasing our attention to how climate change are affecting our oceans. And the reasons for that is because we are highly concerned about the findings from the IPCC reports. We are, as you can see, we are 8 countries collaborating together, and we are all dependent on our sea areas. Also, we are looking for the green solutions to combat climate change. So we have actually committed ourselves with 2 ministerial declarations, both on ocean and climate, and just recently another one on biodiversity, ocean and climate. And both of them underline the importance that we maintain and protect and enhance and restore our natural carbon sinks in the ocean. And also we have financed a 3-year research project, the Nordic Blue Carbon project, that was recently finished, and which your institute led, Solrun. So you will tell us more about the findings from this project just during this talk today. And I also want to tell you that we have a new vision towards 2030, that we by 2030 will have become the most sustainable region in the world. And doing so, we want to increase the financial, the budgets for the climate and the environment projects and also nature-based solutions. So we are deeply concerned about how climate change are affecting our oceans. So back to you, Solrun. We're going to talk more about the Blue Carbon project that you know much about. And the first question from me to you is, what did you find out about the potential carbon storage in these forests in the Nordic region?
I'm very happy to respond to that, but first I need to say a few things. I mean, in this project, NIVA worked with a lot of research institutions across the entire Nordics, so it's a joint effort. And what we did was we produced the first carbon budget for Nordic forests. And in order to do that, you need to understand how much forest you have. So we also made the first maps of aerial distribution of Nordic forests. And we had to develop novel eDNA technique to be able to identify carbon, kelp carbon in the marine sediments. So it was a lot of firsts in this project, but what we didn't do as a first is we didn't look at salt marshes, because when this project started, there wasn't a lot of data about salt marshes in the Nordics, and there's still a lot of data missing. But we are learning that we have quite a lot of salt marshes as well. And some of the other data that we're missing were information about the kelp forests around Greenland that we think are large, but we just did not have the data. So we looked at kelp and rockweed and seagrass, and we came up with two numbers. And one was that the Nordic forests, they sequester 3.9 tons, 3.9 million tons of CO2 equivalents every year. That's approximately 2% of Nordic emissions. And the way they do that is when, the kelp shed their leaves during the year, and the seagrass may be ripped to pieces by propellers or waves, and all this organic matter will go into the waters, and some of it will end up on the ocean floor and sequester into the sediments. And once it's there, it has permanently removed CO2 from the atmosphere. But there is also a temporary storage of carbon in the Nordic forests. The living forests store 33 million tons of CO2. But this is only stored as long as the forests are alive and well and thriving. If we lose them, these 33 million will go back into the atmosphere, which is a challenge. That will increase global warming, and in order to stay on track, more or less, for the Paris goals, we will have to compensate. For example, by cutting transport emissions or energy emissions. And so this number, 33 million, I would presume doesn't mean much to you, and I presume it doesn't mean much to you either. So luckily, there was a report from Accenture last week. They looked at UK households and what had happened to them during the pandemics. And they found out that because UK households, like any other households, the people couldn't travel. They couldn't go out to eat. They didn't buy clothes because they couldn't go out to party. So you didn't really need to look fancy. And because of this, they saved 10% of emissions from UK households. And incidentally, that is 33 million tons of CO2, exactly the same number. So that gives you an idea of what that is.
Yes, that's very interesting, visualizing it like that. But are the blue forests in the Nordic region in good condition, or all over the world?
Some places blue forests are in good condition, luckily, but as a whole, blue forests are struggling globally. Salt marshes are going down, mangroves are going down, seagrass is going down, and as an example, we've lost about 25% of mangrove forests since the 1980s. Now for kelp, it's a little bit different, because it increases in the north and it decreases in the south. And the net is a bit unclear at the moment, but what we do know that about 50% of kelp forests have suffered decline at some point in time. And typically it's because kelp are very, very sensitive to marine heat waves. And we've seen total collapses of huge parts of kelp forests in several places in the world, for example, in Australia.
Yeah. So what are the threats to the blue forests?
Well, they vary a bit because these systems are very diverse. But climate change is a threat to all the different types of blue forest. But for some, ocean temperature is the biggest problem. For others, it's the rising sea level. But there are other threats as well. If you look at mangrove and salt marshes are sort of in the tidal zone, land use change is the problem in several places in the world. Someone mentioned aquaculture in the session before here. That is the threat as well, as is simply deforestation, because mangroves are used for fuel. But if you look at seagrass, kelp, rockweed, these mechanisms, organisms suffer more because of pollution, nutrient-rich waters, or overfishing. So it's quite different. It depends on what you're looking at.
Yeah. But if we lose our blue forests, can we get them back? Can we restore them again?
You can certainly try. And I would have to say that there are a lot of sort of promising restoration techniques that are being tested out. I mean, you can plant mangroves, you can plant seagrass. And in Norway, we're looking into something called green gravel. It's literally where you take a piece of rock and you seed kelp on top of this rock, and you grow kelp in the laboratory, and then you put it into the ocean. And there have been some successes with this type of restoration. But there are some challenges, because you have to keep in mind that there was a reason why blue forest went missing in the first place. And if that reason is still there, it doesn't really help to try to restore it. If pollution is a problem, you need to remove the pollution before the forest can thrive again. And in Norway, for example, we've had a problem with urchins in the north, probably because of overfishing. And these urchins, they graze on kelp and they kill kelp forests. But if you remove the urchins, they come back. But it's pretty sort of laborious to pick out the urchins from the bottom floor. So another word of caution is that restoring these systems can be quite expensive. So it's much, much better if you don't lose them in the first place.
Good, wise words, Solrun. Thank you. Well, the IPCC has guidelines towards reporting on carbon in seagrass, in mangroves and salt marshes. But the seaweeds are missing from these guidelines. And the high-level ocean panel concluded in their report that the supplement guidelines should be improved. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm going to say that I agree. I mean, I know that there are different opinions about this, but as a member of the research community, I have to say that knowledge is a good thing. And if you have these guidelines, you're able to calculate the man-made fluxes from these systems. And if you have that information, that's really useful to policymakers, because if the carbon flux means that you are actually releasing carbon into the atmosphere, you have to compensate, like we talked about before. But I'm going to have to say, Marianne, that the opposite is not true in my opinion. If you're actually sequestering carbon through your blue forest systems, it doesn't mean that it's a free pass for fossil emissions. You have to do both. It's not an either or. And in order to sort of deliver on the 2030 goal, we have to get rid of fossil emissions. But in order to reach net zero, we need all the sinks we can possibly get. And the blue forests are important in that perspective.
Great. And also, IPBES and IPCC, they recently published a workshop report. They were working together for the very first time. And they stress that climate change and biodiversity loss is two of the most pressing issues in human history, actually. And we need to avoid and reverse loss of carbon and species-rich ecosystems. And that is of highest importance. And are blue forests such ecosystems?
Definitely. They're carbon rich and they're very biodiverse, and they're a perfect example actually of nature-based solutions that are also good for biodiversity. There are actually quite a few nature-based solutions that are not good for biodiversity. And we need to find the win-win solutions, and blue forests are an example of that. And before we leave IPCC, I just want to say one more thing about these guidelines, because I think they should be made, like I said. But the IPCC has to be able to make them. And the session before us talked a lot about missing ocean data. And in order for the IPCC to be able to make these guidelines, we need a lot of data that we don't have. The IPCC only synthesizes what's out there. So to all of you that sort of represent different countries, it's really important that your countries invest in the research and the data structures that will enable us to have the information so that the IPCC can do this.
Yeah, wise words. Thank you. And I have one last question for you, actually.
You do.
What would you advise policymakers to do?
There are many things you could do, but I think we're here at COP, and we said before that climate change is a major threat to all of the blue forest systems. So cutting your emissions is an obvious one. The countries need to cut their emissions. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this report that came out a few months ago saying that we're on track to a 2.7 degree warming, far, far away from the Paris goal. And by the end of this COP, I hope that all countries have updated their NDCs, that they have increased ambitions, and more importantly, that they go home and deliver on them, because they mean nothing on the paper. And the other thing I want to say is that for some countries, this is a lot more difficult than for the Nordics, for example. So I do want to say that blue climate financing is important, in my opinion. And I'm very, very happy to see that green forests, we have this forest pledge here at COP26, which is wonderful. And maybe mangroves will be covered by that. But I have this sort of yearning that policymakers don't forget the blue forest that they don't see unless they dive under the water. And earlier on today, the Icelandic Minister for Natural Resources and Environment said in this pavilion that we need much more love and empathy for the oceans. And I second that very strongly. We need love and empathy for the ocean, and we need more knowledge about the ocean.
Thank you.
And that's not enough.
No?
You thought that was enough,
Yeah.
didn't you? No, it's not. Every single country that have blue forests, they need to map them just like we did in this project. If you want to help them, you need to know what forests you have and where you have them. And then you need to know what threatens them. That can vary from location to location, and you have to manage all these pressures. So you have to put appropriate measures and policy instruments into place and focus on the key threats, but manage all of them. This is what we call ecosystem-based management. If you talked about agricultural pollution before, if that's your problem, it doesn't help if you ban fishing. So you need to figure out what's going to solve the problem in one location. And in order to do that, you need to talk to the local people, the people living in the coastal zone, and understand everything. And once you've done all of this, you need to monitor your blue forests. Did you do enough? Are they increasing? Are they decreasing? Do you need to know to do more? And if you need to do more, you need to do more. But finally, I want to say, since we're at COP, again, coming back to, you have to or should understand the man-made carbon fluxes for the blue forest systems. And in order to do that, we need data, we need methodology, we need knowledge. So to all of you, just go out and ask your countries to fund research and data collection. It's so important.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Solrun. Yeah, you're getting applause. Yeah. Thank you, Solrun, for sharing your insights and the knowledge about the blue forest. And I have some take-home messages before we wrap things up. First of all, the blue forests are providing us with both opportunities for climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and also biodiversity, to take care of the biodiversity. So it's a win-win-win, actually, taking care of the blue forests. And it has a significant potential for storing carbon. And it is important to invest in blue forest research. You have to map, measure, and monitor. And also, it's less expensive to maintain them and make sure you don't lose them than to
Yes.
try to restore them afterwards. And I would like to tell audience here that this report is available online on the Nordic.org. And tomorrow at this pavilion there will be a nature-based solution event that if you are interested in this topic, you're very welcome to join in tomorrow. The title is Two Crises Interlinked, so that's very... And then I think I will say thank you Solrun again, thank you Ingrid, and thank to all of you here and the viewers online, and good luck with the rest of the COP.
Thank you. And we'll hang around a little bit if someone wants to chat.